Take a deep breath with me. This morning, Iowa Republican Congressman Steve King is under fire yet again. The controversial lawmaker getting major backlash from both parties after he said this while railing against legalizing abortion in cases of rape and incest.
What if we went back through all the family trees and just pulled those people out that were products of rape and incest? Would there be any population of the world left if we did that? Considering all the wars and all the rape and pillage that's taken place and whatever happened in culture after society, I know I can't certify that they're not part of a product of that.
Without rape and incest, there'd be no population. Yep, a sitting congressman said that. NBC's Josh Lederman in Fort Dodge, Iowa, King's District. Josh, this isn't a surprise. A ton of the 2020 Democrats have called on him to resign. But here's the thing. Members of his own party are saying that. What about the people of Iowa, his own constituents? What do they think?
Yeah, Stephanie, we've been talking to folks here in Fort Dodge as they show up for work in the morning, do some of their shopping this morning. And the collective reaction has been a deep sigh. People are tired of this. They've heard these kind of comments from Steve King before, and they're not happy about the way that it represents Iowa to the rest of the country. Take a listen.
I don't feel very good about it. I think we could do better.
Do you think that Congressman King at this point should resign?
Well, he should resign or people should fire him.
I think that we're getting laughed at. I do when we make comments like that.
And Stephanie, we wanted to show a cross-section of views here. We've been looking to find someone who might defend what Steve King said. So far, we have not been able to find anybody.
All right, well, here's the thing. He has said a lot of offensive things before, and he won re-election. Does it seem to be in question at this point? Are there other Republicans there saying, I'm going to need to take this seat?
Yeah, he has a Republican challenger. But look, this is a deep red district. Trump won here by 27 points. And in any normal times, a Republican here would have no problem. The last election, Steve King barely held on by about 3 points. He does have a Republican challenger. But the ironic thing here is, Stephanie, for Democrats that want to flip this seat, the worst thing that could happen would be for Steve King to resign or lose in the primary. Because if it's Steve King heading into this next election, Democrats actually could have a chance at flipping it.
All right, Josh Lederman, thank you so much. Joining me now, Michael Steel, former senior advisor to Jeb Bush and new father, and Arthur Brooks back with me. All right, before we jump into the latest comment, in case people don't remember, I want to read some of the other things that Steve King has said in the past. In 2010, on the House floor, King said of racial profiling, profiling has always been an important component of legitimate law enforcement. In 2013, when talking about undocumented immigrants, he said, for everyone who's a valedictorian, there's another 100 out there who weigh 130 pounds, and they've got calves the size of cantaloupes because they're hauling 75 pounds of marijuana across the desert. In 2017, when talking about birthright citizenship, he said, I'd like to see an America that is just so homogeneous that we look a lot like the same. That same year, he wrote on Twitter, assimilation, not diversity, is our American strength. And this very year, he posed the question, white nationalist, white supremacist, Western civilization. How did that language become offensive? Arthur. How is this person still a sitting member of Congress, given this laundry list of things? Iowa is a great state. There's no other Republicans who will say, I believe in your, I agree with you on policy, but we're going to have somebody else here. Why hasn't that happened?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, you'd actually have to ask the people of Iowa. But it is revealing that somebody that is in a super blood red district is almost losing, notwithstanding the fact that he's got so many terms behind him that he's locked up this whole, infrastructure. I mean, the truth of the matter is that he's not as popular as he would be if he were in any way normal or said normal things. The other thing is that, he goes to a Cowtown kind of Republican event and he's got 1,000 cameras because he's, 1 second away from saying something crazy apparently all the time. And then, of course, what happens is, in politics today, the Democrats say, oh, he represents the id of republicanism. This is what conservatives actually think. And they take this just crazy thing that he said at this, off the wall event and we broadcast it and talk about it as if it were kind of what Republicans were thinking. He's a one-man sort of Republican version of the squad. He doesn't represent the party, I don't think.
Except he's in office. So, Michael, you are a member of the Republican Party. How do you feel about Steve King representing Republicans? It doesn't have to be, oh, he's so crazy, the district might flip to blue. You could just pick another Republican.
Sure. Look, Steve King is a nasty old kook who ought to be muttering to himself on a park bench, not representing anyone in the United States Congress. He's an embarrassment to the Republican Party. He's an embarrassment to the state of Iowa. He's an embarrassment to the proud tradition of the United States. And I think that's why you're seeing bipartisan condemnation, not just from Democratic 2020 candidates, not just from Democratic congressional leaders, but the head of the House Republican Conference has called on Steve King to resign, both because what he is saying is deeply offensive and wrong and hurts the party, and also because he is putting a very, very safe Republican seat potentially in play. Look, Steve King has a Republican primary opponent. I urge anyone interested in responsible conservative governance to support him in any way possible.
It's funny that you say he's sort of the squad. He's different than the squad, but I understand the point you're making. But our colleague Jonathan Allen says that his comments could actually pose a big threat to the Republican Party, and he writes this. For Democrats, King represents an opportunity to tell voters, particularly suburban women, that Republicans are pushing extreme policies based on an outlandish ideology. We know that Republicans need to figure out how do they get new voters, how do they get young voters, how do they get women. How can they do that with Steve King in office and Democrats in a position to just run that sound over and over and over?
They need to have a great primary challenger who will beat him in the primary and replace him. That's what Republicans need to do. Look, you just saw a representative of the Republican Party saying exactly that. What he says is offensive, what he says is wrong, what he says is bad for the party. Everybody go out and vote for his opponent in the primary. That's what they have to do, and unless they get that done, it's going to be a major threat. Look, any time that there's a part of the party that's way out of the mainstream of its own party, it's going to get played over and over and over and over again by the other side.
If he is way out of the mainstream.
He is. I think he is. I mean, I think he is. I mean, I look at. I'm not political.
Really, the president has said a lot.
I'm not a member of a party, but I look at public opinion polling all day long, and the stuff that he says is not shared by. Look, I mean, the stuff that he says about immigrants, people are actually very positive about immigrants, including mainstream Republicans.
Okay, but Michael, you know who isn't positive on immigrants? This current administration. So will the president see this as so offensive? Will the president or Mitch McConnell say, hey, Steve King, time for you to pack it in and resign?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the fact that Josh, a great reporter, can't find people to defend Steve King in his own district is pretty telling here. I think that Senator McConnell is probably going to say this is a House matter. The president is an interesting question. He has been reluctant to criticize some of these figures, but I hope in this case what Representative King has said and the condemnations from his own party leaders in the House have been so clear that the president, if he's asked, if he chooses to address this issue, will say very, very clearly that Steve King does not have his support and that he will be supporting his primary opponent so that we can protect this Republican seat in Iowa.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.